You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
You're listening to IRN, 2014 Border Zone International UFO Conference.
Our next speaker will be Dennis Balthaser. Now, Dennis is one of the top U.S. investigators of UFO phenomenon. Okay, he has worked in the Texas Highway Department in El Paso for 33 years, and his interest in UFOs led him to move to Roswell, New Mexico. There, he became the lead investigator for the Roswell UFO Museum and also served on its board of directors for several years. He's a certified UFO investigator with MUFON, a mutual UFO network, and Dennis has been widely recognized for his research in the Roswell incident, as well as Area 51, underground bases, and the mysteries of the Egyptian pyramids. So I'd like to introduce you right now to Mr. Balthaser.
Thank you. Thank you. For the past several years, I've been concentrating my research on the 1947 Roswell incident, Area 51 up in Nevada, and underground bases. And I'll talk about all those three in this presentation. I'll talk about Roswell because after 67 years, it refuses to go away. Area 51, because for the most part, according to our government, it hasn't existed. And underground bases because our government is simply lying to us about that. In addition to that research, in 2001, I was asked to join the Great Pyramids of Giza Advisory Board in Egypt, and that's some research I want to share with you also. So we have a lot to cover, and I'm hopeful that when I get through, you'll find it interesting and both informative. This research I've chosen to dedicate my life to is controversial at times and requires a tough-collar skin when the debunkers and the critics start getting after you. Trust me, the research and study of ufology is more difficult than anything I dealt with in my 33 years with the Texas Highway Department in civil engineering. Now, because of my brutal honesty, I've been fortunate in that I've not been questioned too often, and when I have been, I prefer to go public with it, exposing the critics and reveal their true nature, which in most cases is attacking people rather than data. It's a lot easier to do that. I found out through the years that sharing information with the public, whether it's through my website, television or radio interviews, editorials or lectures, there is a common denominator that prevails: truth. And allowing people to make their own decisions always wins out. You're here because you have some interest in the subject or perhaps out of curiosity. So what I'll simply be doing in this presentation is sharing some of my research with you that I've obtained over the years, and I'll let you decide if you want to believe it or not. There's a tremendous amount of substantial information available to support the fact that the planet has probably been and still is being visited by extraterrestrials from other worlds. I just can't be egotistical enough to think that we're the only living thing in the universe. Curiosity in UFOs, in fact, is the second most popular thing on the World Wide Web. We got a Roper poll here. 72% of Americans believe that the government is not telling the public everything it knows about UFO activity. 68% of those surveyed think the government knows more about extraterrestrial life than it's letting on. 55% say that the government does not share enough information with the public in general, and 60% said when national security is not at risk, the United States government should not withhold information about UFO sightings and potential encounters with extraterrestrials. Now, I put a note at the bottom of that. These percentages are higher than politicians get elected by. There's no doubt in my mind that the government, not everyone in the government, but several within our government and certain military leaders are definitely concealing information about the existence of UFOs, as well as other things which you and I as taxpayers are footing the bill for. while being lied to about their existence or the truth pertaining to it. Today, cover-up is a way of life, whereas 60 years ago, people in general felt very differently about their leaders and the way our government operated. Back then, the public respected them, probably because they earned that respect. I seriously doubt there's anyone in this audience that could name 5 people in the government that they respect. Time's up. Another problem, as I see it, is the fact that many people just don't care if extraterrestrials exist or not. For our young people, it's no big deal. Having been raised with Star Wars, Star Trek, the X-Files, and others, they pretty much accept the fact that ETs probably exist. It's also been proven that the more educated one is, the more likely they will agree that there is life elsewhere. And then there's the news media, that for the most part makes light of UFO events, if they finally do report it. Some of us had researched this subject, and some of you have an interest in it, however, feel this could be the biggest story of the millennium, and we continue to pursue it. I, for one, want my children and grandchildren to know what their future might hold for them, and if it involves a higher technological species than we are, which wouldn't take much, by the way, I think they should know that, and our government should quit lying to us about some of the things they do or do not tell us. Most of us have been raised in a box. Throughout our lives, we've been told and taught things by others, such as our parents, our teachers, or priests and pastors. For many, that information is enough, and nothing is questioned. For some of us, we stray outside of the box and request more information, as is the case in the study of ufology, and the fact that I believe there's a tremendous amount of information that we're not told, or worse, not told the truth. Who has given a few the authority to withhold this information from us? People often ask me if there in fact are aliens visiting our planet, why don't they communicate with us? And my simple answer is, why would they want to? I don't go in the backyard and talk to insects. If they can get here from wherever they're from, they understandably have intelligence, knowledge, and technology far superior to ours. Since, for example, we can't go there. What do we have to offer a species so far advanced of us? The human being is the only species on the planet that cannot live with each other like other species do because of such things as nationalities and borders, the color of their skin, religious beliefs, etc. We're destroying the planet as fast as we can, the rainforest and the ozone layer. So why would they want to communicate with us? What can we offer to them? Very little as I see it, and I hope we don't destroy our planet in the meantime. Because people are more educated today than they were in 1947, I do not buy into the possibility that the government is afraid of panic or fear of the public. Although I do believe there would be some concern in the financial world, the religions of the world, and the leadership of several nations. Since the Roswell incident research started in the late 1970s, hundreds, perhaps thousands of first-hand witnesses have been interviewed by various researchers. I personally have talked to between 100 and 150 first, second, and third-hand witnesses. In most cases, the overwhelming information obtained leans towards an extraterrestrial craft of unknown origin with bodies crashed on the New Mexico desert in Roswell in 1947. Very few believe it was anything of our government, or the Russians, Germans, or Japanese. So whose was it? Hopefully in our lifetime we'll know the truth. But as I get older, that possibility seems less likely. But it'll certainly not discourage us from continuing to do the search for the truth, because it's too important to know the truth. We continue to lose first-hand witnesses as time takes its toll on some of the people involved. Many of those that were involved in 1947 are now in their 80s if they're still alive. Others that were involved have decided to embellish or exaggerate their involvement. That creates problems for us researchers. Still others refuse to talk about it after all these years due to their commitment to the government or the military by being sworn to secrecy many years ago. and still have that respect for the original leaders and government after all these years. As a researcher, that makes my job difficult, but I respect them and wish that in some cases we had that respect for our leaders today. The photographs taken in General Ramey's office in Fort Worth, Texas in July of 1947 by James Bond Johnson continues to be one of the smoking guns in resolving the Roswell incident. Johnson passed away in 2006, a few years after I had interviewed him. In 3 different interviews done by David Rudiak, Kevin Randall, and myself, Johnson has started to embellish his involvement and changed his story. The interviews are posted on my website, truthseeker@roswell.com. Several groups have attempted to analyze one of the photographs taken by Johnson where General Ramey is holding a piece of paper with the typed words facing the camera. David Rudiak, as well as several others, are doing some excellent work in trying to decipher what is written on the paper General Ramey is holding. Now, there's a couple things in this picture here. That's the memo I'm talking about. The type on that piece of paper is facing the camera. General Ramey had no idea that years later with computers we'd be able to start reading that. That's Colonel DeBose, his assistant. The thing I want you to notice here, this was set up when Major Marcel was taken to Fort Worth to talk to General Ramey and show him some of the debris. When he got there, they put the package that Jesse Marcel had behind where they're sitting. And on the floor was a weather balloon. Now, if anything had been wrapped in that package, that paper would be wrinkled. That's brand new paper off of a brand new roll of paper. So we know that's a stage picture right there. There's a package back here behind General Ramey and Colonel DeBose is a package. That's probably what Major Marcel brought with him when he came to Fort Worth. There's very little doubt in the minds of most researchers that part of that memo reads victims of the wreck. Weather balloons and mogul balloons would not have had victims. There's some disagreement on what the entire message says, but it appears there is no disagreement on the words victims of the wreck. Now, there's only a few words in the English language that have the letters V, 2 I's, and an S in the same location as the word victims. And we don't believe violins or virgins had anything to do with the crash saucer in Roswell. Other words and phrases that seem to appear on the message include the word disc and a reference to sending out a press release about weather balloons. The analysis of that photograph continues today as better equipment becomes available, and the clarity of the original photograph can be enhanced in order to read what is actually typed on that paper. General Ramey covered the story up in 1947 by stating it was simply a weather balloon, misidentified by the elite 509th Bomb Wing stationed in Roswell. 47 years later, in 1994, the Air Force would admit in their report that Ramey was wrong about it being a weather balloon. It was a mogul balloon. Some of us researchers that continue to investigate the Roswell incident are convinced that after 4 different excuses by the Air Force, we still have not been told what actually happened near Roswell, and we continue to research it. Some of the Freedom of Information requests that I've submitted to the Military Personnel Records Center in St. Louis about personnel assigned to the Roswell Army Airfield in 1947 continue to be returned with a generic stamp stating those service records may have been destroyed in a fire at the center in July of 1973. New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff received a similar response from the General Accounting Office when he did his investigation into the Roswell incident in 1995. Schiff was told that the records for the Roswell Army Airfield were also destroyed, but they had no knowledge of who destroyed them or why. Those were incoming and outgoing records of the only atomic bomb group in the world at the time. And you can believe the GAO if you want to. Personally, I do not believe that the records of the only atomic bomb group in 1947 were destroyed. The location and number of crash sites continues to frustrate us. The Corn Ranch site just north of Roswell and west of US 285 was made famous in Schmidt and Randall's book in the early 1990s. Some military witnesses have supported that site. However, it's my belief that that site has any validity, it's only as a diversionary site. I obtained an affidavit from the McKnight family several years ago in which the McKnights stated that their family owned that ranch and lived there in 1947. And nothing related to the Roswell incident happened on their ranch. And in the past, the current owner has even had allowed tours to the site. Prior to his death in 2001, Frank Kaufman, who claimed to be part of the Roswell recovery team in 47, changed his support to the Corn Ranch site at a location several miles further to the west, toward the Corona debris site. All of Kaufman's accounts now have been proven to be wrong and were hoaxed by him. The Jim Ragsdale site west of Roswell in the Capitan Mountain was brought forward by Ragsdale in 1993 and made public in 1995. Unfortunately, he provided two affidavits having different descriptions of where he was and what he witnessed. Since Ragsdale passed away in 1995, we may never know which, if any, of his affidavits were true. Personally, I cannot, without much more research, put any confidence in the Ragsdale site. Now, the three sites I'm talking about, down here is Roswell in the corner. Corn Ranch site is about 22 miles north on 285, about 6 miles to the west. The Ragsdale site is out here in the Capitan Mountain. Corona is probably the only site that I put any confidence in. That's where the rancher Mac Brassel found the debris. That's the town of Corona. It's about 12 miles southeast of the town of Corona. The Corona debris field is unbalanced. The Corona debris field site, located on what was the Foster Ranch in 1947, is to me, based on years of research by many individuals, the official crash site for the Roswell incident. That was the location as described by Ranch Foreman Mac Brassel, where he found debris scattered over an area several hundred yards wide by 3/4 of a mile long. That's also the site where Major Jesse Marcel and Captain Cabot went to investigate the scene and collected some of the debris prior to the military cleaning it up. There's a very strong possibility that there's another site existed a short distance from the debris field where the actual bodies were found. That will continue to be investigated and hopefully verified. Stanton Friedman, the original civilian Roswell investigator, has for years mentioned the possibility of two craft having a mid-air collision, with one craft going down on the plains of St. Augustine, west of Socorro, and the other crashing at the Corona debris field. The last excuse given by the Air Force was case closed, where they said the bodies recovered in the Roswell incident were anthropomorphic crash test dummies. The Air Force, however, didn't mention that the crash test dummies weren't used until 1953, 6 years after the Roswell incident. But that's a minor point when you're lying for 60 years. Perhaps now you can understand the difficult task we researchers have with several crash sites to investigate, the witnesses that embellish their experience or involvement, or due to having age and memory problems, and those that flat refuse to talk about it at all. We continue to search for new witnesses and confirm the information already obtained. We will not give up, because something happened near Roswell in July 1947, and 60-some years later our government and military have not satisfactorily explained it, even with the 4 excuses we were given. Now, for a place that hasn't officially existed for many years, according to the government, Area 51 has been referred to by a lot of names over the years. Some of those names include Groom Lake, Dreamland, Paradise Ranch, West Watertown Strip, the Box, the Pig Farm, and several others. Many people do not know how or when Area 51 came into existence in the Nevada desert, some 85 miles northwest of Las Vegas, Nevada. Most people believe it was a military base, when in fact it was originally opened by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. President Truman, through the National Security Act of 1947, set up both the National Security Council and the Central Intelligence Agency. Back then, the director of the CIA answered directly to the president. In 1949, the CIA Act was passed, which stipulated that not only would CIA activities be classified, but that its budget would also be classified. The United States government could also deny any responsibility for the CIA activities should they be exposed. After World War II, the United States was very concerned about whether the Soviet Union had developed an atomic bomb. One way to find out would be to overfly the Soviet Union in a high-altitude aircraft equipped with cameras. Lockheed's Kelly Johnson designed such an aircraft and went directly to the CIA with it. Normally, such an aircraft would have been test flown at Edwards Air Force Base in California. But with the security required for such a top-secret project as this, it was decided to look for a new secure site somewhere in the Southwest. A dozen sites were looked at before deciding on Groom Lake, Nevada, adjacent to the Nevada test site. This area was previously controlled by the Atomic Energy Commission for testing atomic weapons, was expanded to include Groom Lake, and by July 1955, the CIA had its secret base. A fake construction firm, CLJ, was formed to oversee the construction of the base, mostly done by subcontractors, to build hangars, a mile-long runway, ramps, control tower, mess hall, and other required structures. The airplane that was designed by Kelly Johnson was known as the Aquatone by the CIA and as Angel by Lockheed. The first prototype was called Article 341 and flown to Groom Lake in a transport plane on July 24, 1955. Eventually, that aircraft became known as the U-2. The thing to remember about the inception of Area 51, it was not originally an Air Force base, but rather that Lockheed and the CIA were in charge, not the military. Pilots for the U-2 were recruited from the F-84 pilots from top-secret clearances from the Strategic Air Command. If they became U-2 pilots, they resigned from the Air Force and became CIA employees. The first mission over the Soviet Union took place on July 4, 1956, and the missions were quite effective due to the higher speed and high-altitude capabilities, until May 1, 1960, when Francis Gary Powers was shot down by a Soviet missile, captured and forced to admit to spying. That same day, the first American spy satellite's film was retrieved, which showed more information about the Soviet Union than all the previous U-2 flights combined. The satellites, however, did not put an end to our spy planes being developed and test flown at Area 51. With Project Oxcart, which eventually became the SR-71, a longer runway was needed at Area 51, and in fact a small town was built for the support personnel assigned there. Today the base has 4 runways, one of which is 30,000 feet long. That's almost 6 miles of runway. When Kelly Johnson of the Skunk Works was asked to build the Oxcart aircraft by the CIA, which later was named the SR-71, they required an aircraft that could fly at 3.5 times the speed of sound, that's a half mile per second, with a range of 4,100 miles, at an altitude of 84,000 to 97,000 feet. Flying at a speed of 2,200 miles per hour, that airplane required 186 miles to make a U-turn. The SR-71 was originally designed as the RS-71 Blackbird, but President Johnson, in a public speech, accidentally inverted the letters, and since the President is rarely corrected, the Air Force changed its letter designation to SR-71. The original letters RS stood for Reconnaissance Strike. The Pentagon originally termed the name Blackbird. Black because he had developed it in the dark by the CIA, and bird because it could fly. The stealth F-117 fighter, which by the way was taken out of service and replaced with the F-22 Raptor, south of Roswell at Holloman Air Force Base, was first on the design drawing boards in 1973 and referred to as Project Harvey. Because of the flat surfaces on the plane to reflect radar away from their source, such as the appearance of facets on a diamond. Lockheed named the project the Hopeless Diamond. It was renamed Have Blue when the prototypes began arriving at Area 51 in 1977 for testing. The American public and the rest of the world found out about the stealth fighter in 1991 during the Gulf War, 18 years after the secret project began. Other aircraft that have been test flown at Area 51 include the A-10, the A-12, the B-1, the B-2, and several others. Captured foreign airplanes are also flown there, such as the Russian MiG-21. We believe under development and being test flown there today are such names as the TR-3A, the Black Manta, the Pumpkin Seed, and the Aurora. Within the past few years, contrails have been seen that leave a trail that look like donuts on a rope, which is believed to be a pulsating propulsion system, possibly from the Aurora. That top drawing is an artist's conception of what the Aurora looks like. The bottom is an actual photograph I took in Roswell several years ago of a contrail that looks like donuts on a rope, meaning it has a circle every so often down that contrail. Could be a pulsating propulsion system. Several researchers have indicated that debris from the crash saucer at Roswell, originally taken to Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio in 1947, may today be at Area 51. Other reports indicate that Area 51 has as many as 22 levels below ground. The secret base was brought to the forefront involving UFOs when Bob Lazar claimed to have been there to back-engineer a UFO propulsion system in another area of the base known as S4 at Papoose Lake. No real evidence of this has come to light, and Lazar has been seriously questioned about his credibility, his education, and his knowledge. Like Lieutenant Colonel Corso, co-author of The Day After Roswell, who I met on 3 separate occasions, and several of the Roswell witnesses, Lazar is one of those type individuals that I'd like to believe, but cannot without a significant more amount of verification of his claims. Credibility and verification and validity remain the cornerstone of UFO research. Rumors have been rampant for some time that the base is or has moved. That's not true, as I was at the base in 2006 when I did 2 lectures in the town of Rachel, next to the base, and one of my sources of information recently informed me that a new gigantic water storage tank has recently been constructed at Area 51. Employees are moved around from base to base when their projects are completed. So the number of employees at the base varies from time to time depending on what projects are being done there. Daytime stealth is one of the projects we believe is currently being tested at the base, which if successful would make the surface of an aircraft appear invisible by taking on the appearance of the background sky. Also being tested there today are many of the new unmanned drones. Each year, the President of the United States has issued a presidential determination pertaining to a classified information concerning the Air Force operating location near Groom Lake, Nevada. Basically, that determination states that information concerning activities at Groom Lake have been properly determined to be classified, and disclosure would be harmful to national security. Continued protection of this information is therefore in the paramount interest of the United States. President Clinton started this presidential determination when 2 women tried to sue the government because their husbands, who were employed at Area 51, died due to radiation exposure from toxic waste being burned above the ground. The case was thrown out due to the fact that the base where they work doesn't exist. President Bush continued the yearly determination, but I've not been able to find any signed by President Obama. indicating they're either no longer issued or no longer made public. As a side note, the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't permit the burning of toxic waste above ground at any other location in the United States. As a taxpayer who has helped pay for the base over the years, I certainly would be disturbed if the base were to shut down or moved, particularly after we've been lied to about its existence for many years. I do have mixed emotions about Area 51, however, as I look at the base as a catch-22 situation. As a world leader, our country needs a place to test newly developed aircraft and other technology, because we certainly don't want our adversaries knowing what we're developing. But if an alien craft or beings are kept there, I think we deserve to know it. I also think the base should be required to comply with all environmental policies imposed on other industries and explain why employees are dying due to radiation exposure at the base, as has been reported in recent years. Because of our government's past record, I'm highly suspicious that they're hiding something other than the development of new aircraft. As recently as 1995, the Department of the Interior withdrew 4,000 acres of BLM land from public access, creating an even larger buffer zone to prevent the public from seeing any activities at Groom Lake from the adjacent mountains. This means the area of land incorporated into Area 51 is now the size of Connecticut, and the restricted airspace above the base encloses several thousand square miles. Security at the base continues to be some of the most stringent of anywhere in the world. In addition to the white Grand Cherokees we heard about for years, the guards are now also using Ford and Chevy pickups, as I found out when I was there in 2006. Highly sophisticated sensing devices are in place as well, using cameras, motion detectors, and sensors that can determine the difference between human and animal odor and perspiration. F-16s and Black Hawk helicopter gunships fly around the perimeter of the base to keep the curious people out. The signs posted at the two entrances still say the use of deadly force is authorized, and they mean what they say. If you look at the very bottom corner of that picture in red letters, it says the use of deadly force is authorized. For people that don't understand English, that means they can shoot you. That's one of the listening devices up on the hill. That's about the 13-mile road that gets off the extraterrestrial highway, goes straight back by that mountain to one of the gates. That's not one of the guards. That's the back gate. That was kind of interesting when I was there. I walked down, but there is no fence around Area 51. Every so often they have a pole with a sphere on top, and the F-16s and the helicopters use that for a reference. But there's no fence. So I was walking down along the boundary. Up here is a camera mounted on a 30-foot pole. Well, every time I'd stop, that camera would be on me. We did that about 3 times, and I finally turned around and I waved at them. Let them know, I know you're looking at me, so don't worry about it. But that's all they have to do out there. So for those of you that thought our government can't keep secrets, I've just presented with a few examples of some secrets that have been kept, at least at Area 51. The base, with a land area the size of the state of Connecticut, existed under the control of the CIA for some 25 or 30 years before anything public was acknowledged about its existence. Today we're told that a base exists there, but nothing else. We found out about the stealth F-117 during the Gulf War in 1991, when in fact it had been test flown at Area 51 in 1977 under the name Have Blue, and its development had begun in 1973. With other projects going on at Area 51, including radioactive projects, and the fact that as taxpayers we are helping to fund those projects, I feel you and I have every right to know and to be suspicious, and should continue to seek whatever information we can of what's taking place at the base. Speaking of being suspicious about what our government does and says, let me assure you that not all of my suspicion involves strange objects in the sky that we can't identify, but also involves things deep within the earth. My engineering background is responsible for the portion of my research, as I wondered for years whether the rumors about underground facilities were really true, and if they were, how were the facilities built, who built them, and for what purpose. Apparently, black project money is one of the largest expenditures our government has, and it appears, at least to me, there's very little accountability on those projects. To obtain funding for a black project, such as catchphrases as national security and research and development are used to obtain the funding, with very few questions being asked, since there won't be any answers forthcoming anyway. Underground facilities have been constructed for years, not only by the United States, but also by many other countries. And many of those projects involve high-tech engineering to accomplish. Through different means of obtaining information, we know that the Russians, the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, and many other countries have subterranean tunnel systems and bases located underground. The experience and technology required is commonplace today. And with the advent of new technology, underground facilities will be even more complex and more secretive in the future. A workforce is readily available for doing underground projects with years of experience in mining for such things as diamonds, coal, salt, and many other common products. Equipment has been developed over the years to the point where very large boring machines can now work below ground under the Earth's surface with no knowledge above ground that anything is taking place. Several companies such as the Rand Corporation, Dawn Engineering, Bechtel, and others have been heavily involved in tunneling for years. So if we have technology to tunnel and bore through mountains and deep within the earth for mining, constructing highways, railroads, drainage systems, etc., why not also for secretive projects we taxpayers know very little about? I want to share some of the equipment that's being used. That's one of the flame jets. Some of these pictures I'm just showing you the relationship of the size of the equipment compared to the men that operate them. That's one of the nuclear devices. And this one has a patent date of September 1972. So we know they got a lot more newer stuff since then. These things are gigantic. That one's used to make a vertical hole. As I stated earlier, it's almost a necessity today to do secretive work underground because of the large number of satellites circling the Earth with the ability to take a photo that can read a newspaper from 200 miles up. It's basically the only way to keep secrets from the public or the spying eyes of our adversaries. For our national defense, missile silos were placed 150 to 200 feet underground in the early 1960s. They had fuel, water, generators, living facilities, and supplies for a number of personnel for at least 30 days. The initial cost of constructing these facilities was in the $14 million range for each one, and many were only used a few years before being deactivated. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, is located in the Cheyenne Mountain near Colorado Springs, Colorado. It became fully operational on April 20th, 1966, replacing an above-ground facility at Ent Air Force Base. The initial cost was $142 million. Today, its budget exceeds that amount annually. NORAD's job is to monitor anything in space, which today includes well over 13,000 objects on orbit around the Earth, larger than the size of a baseball. Since space tracking began in 1957, space objects have been cataloged, some of which have since long re-entered the Earth's atmosphere and burned up. This underground facility has almost 3 miles of tunnels, 3-foot thick blast doors, and is located 1,700 feet beneath the mountain. It employs over 1,000 military and civilian personnel and is also self-sustaining with its own power, water, air, and food for over 800 people for a 30-day period. Rumor has it that NORAD will again be moved, and I think has been, due to the security being increased after 9/11. That is a map that shows where some believe that there are underground facilities primarily in the western United States. There's two books that I highly recommend on the subject of underground bases, both written by Dr. Saunders. The United States Navy has published articles and reports pertaining to the feasibility of having underwater facilities with no connection to the mainland for basic needs such as air, water, and being self-sufficient for large numbers of personnel for extended periods of time. Has our technology driven us underground? Not really, because the Hopi Indians of Arizona talk about their ancestors originating from within the earth and arriving through a tunnel at the base of San Francisco Peak near Flagstaff. We're finding vast tunnel systems in Egypt on the Giza Plateau that may have been used as canals with water to transport items from one location to another. So concealing things underground is not something new. At the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that I had been asked to join the advisory board of the Great Pyramids of Giza Research Association in 2001. I suppose many of you are wondering how ufologists would fit in with the research of the pyramids of Egypt. Dr. John DeSalvo is the director of the association, and he has organized some of the most prominent researchers in the world within the past few years to research the history of the pyramids and study the effects the pyramids supposedly possess. Currently, the advisory board consists of 30 individuals from Canada, Ukraine, Italy, India, France, Malta, and the United States, comprised of scientists, physicists, Egyptologists, engineers, and now ufologists. The association has over 5,000 members. Dr. Salvo recently published his second book on pyramid research, which I consider one of the most detailed and informative books ever written on the subject. Being involved with this research has truly been fascinating, and this presentation will share some of that. One of our board members, Stephen Mueller, has done extensive research on a civilization known as Cometians that existed well over 10,000 years ago that he described in his book, The Land of Osiris. He and others believe it was a black, advanced prehistoric civilization in North Africa, which today is Egypt. Could the Cometian civilization have been involved in building the 3 pyramids of Giza? Mueller thinks the answer could be yes, and his research supports that of others that say the Great Pyramids were never intended to be a tomb for an Egyptian king, but a machine to transform, generate, and transport energy. The theories on the Cometian civilization by some researchers goes as far as stating that they may have had contact with star people, because it appears they had technology and tools that were superior to anything the Egyptians had or any other old civilization. The use of water and or sound may someday prove to have been a key factor in the building of the pyramids as a means of overcoming gravity to handle the massive stones and to build the pyramids with the precise accuracy used to cut them. No mummy or remains of any kind have ever been found in the Great Pyramid. When first entered by the Arabs in 820 AD, the only thing discovered was an empty granite box in the king's chamber called a coffer. That empty lidless box was uninscribed and undecorated, and most certainly the chamber would have been covered with hieroglyphics and paintings, and possessions had a pharaoh been placed in it, as was the custom of the Egyptians when preparing their pharaohs for burial to enter the afterlife. It's the only pyramid with both ascending and descending passages. Other pyramids only have descending passages. Dead pharaohs don't need air, so why were there air shafts built into the Great Pyramid? Originally, the Great Pyramid was covered with highly polished limestone casing stones, which acted like gigantic mirrors which would have been reflected to sunlight, and so powerful that it would have been visible from the moon. The Arabs removed most of the casing stones from the pyramids in the 14th century to build their own mosques and temples. The casting stones, the only one you can see them on any day today is that middle one at the very top. Some of those casing stones are still there. And if you'll notice the flat top on the big one here in the front, and also the alignment is exactly like the constellation Orion. It's been assumed by many that the Great Pyramid was built for Khufu, the pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, about 2600 BC. But records indicate that Khufu was not buried in the Great Pyramid. The only statue ever found of Khufu is in the Cairo Museum. It's only 3 inches tall, being found many miles away from the pyramid. It is therefore our belief that the 3 pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx are much older than we've been told by modern-day Egyptologists. Many have researched the pyramids during that past 400 or 500 years, including Napoleon Bonaparte in 1798, whose expedition was accompanied not only by his military, but also by his engineers, surveyors, astronomers, artists, and archaeologists. Their work was published in many volumes from 1809 to 1822 by order of Napoleon. Napoleon himself was supposedly shaken after spending time alone in the king's chamber and refused to ever talk about it again. Some say he was given some vision of his destiny while alone in the king's chamber. There you can see the flat top on the Great Pyramid. Another one of our advisory board's members, Joe Parr, has spent an entire night on top of the Great Pyramid on 2 separate occasions, in 1997 and 1998, conducting electrical, magnetic, and radioactive measurements. He's been able to measure an energy field or a bubble that appears to form around the pyramid. He believes that energy field appears to vary with the 11-year sunspot cycle. The top of the pyramid has a 30 by 30 foot flat area. And as a point of interest, it appears that the Great Pyramid was never finished, since the top is flat and contains no topstone or capstone. Our Ukrainian board member, Vladimir Krasnolovitz, and you don't know how happy I am when I can say that, utilizing large pyramid recently built by the Russian National Academy of Science in the Ukraine, has discovered that the immune system of organisms increased upon exposure in a pyramid. Agricultural seeds placed in the pyramid up to 1 to 5 days showed a 30% increase in yield. Violent weather seems to decrease in the area of the pyramid, and the potency of pharmaceuticals increased with decreasing side effects. And the pyramids, the strength of various viruses and bacteria decreases in the pyramids. Ordinary water does not freeze even at 40 degrees below zero, and remains its properties for years, while synthesized diamonds turn out harder and purer when placed in the pyramids. Since I've had an interest in the pyramids and a few other subjects for years, I felt honored when I was recommended by Jeff Renz, the radio host of Sightings on the Radio, and asked to join the advisory board with Dr. DeSalvo. Pyramid research may well be the most difficult I've ever attempted. After all, it's not going to be easy for any of us to prove, much less convince the world, that the Great Pyramids of Egypt may not be Egyptian. Keep in mind that tourism is big business, and they will not relinquish that easily. In my research, I'm referring only to the 3 pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx. I do not believe, if not all of the other pyramids of Egypt may have been built by Egyptians, but when they're studied, it seems obvious to me they're simply poor replicas of the original 3 based on the workmanship, the much smaller size, and the lack of technology involved. None of the pyramids anywhere in the world compare with the 3 pyramids of Giza. The factual information about the pyramids of Giza to someone like myself that devoted 36 years to civil engineering is almost incomprehensible. Let me share a few of those facts with you before we talk about some of the other research. The Great Pyramid of Giza is composed of 2.5 million blocks of limestone, which weigh 2 to 70 tons each. You could build 30 Empire State Buildings with that much material. The base of the pyramid covers 13 acres and it has a volume of 90 million cubic feet. When built, it was 454 feet high, equivalent to a 48-story building. There are 203 courses or steps to the summit. Each side slopes upward at an angle of exactly 51 degrees, 51 minutes, and each side has an area of 5.5 acres, while less than a 50th of an inch separates some of the stone blocks. Construction of the Great Pyramids was no accident. Whoever built them knew what they were doing. Some of our assumptions about the pyramids of Giza being older than we've been told are derived from the Sphinx. For many years, the body of the Sphinx was protected by sand that completely covered it, except for the head. Further study of the Sphinx now indicates to many researchers that the deterioration of the Sphinx body was not caused by wind and sand, but by rainwater. There has not been that volume of water in that area of the world for over 7,000 years, which predates the Egyptian civilization. That today takes credit for the Sphinx and the pyramids of Giza. There seems to be some similarity between the face of the Sphinx today and what it was how many years back? 10,000? So, in closing, I'd like to close with the quote I like to use. Always telling the truth means never having to remember anything. Thank you.
You're listening to IRN 2014 Border Zone International UFO Conference.